Eleanor Whitfield's ranch stretched across the rolling plains of Dakota Territory, a kingdom of dust, cattle, and fences. To many, she was a woman to be admired, wealthy, commanding, independent in ways that startled and unsettled the men who lived nearby. Yet beneath that image of strength, Eleanor's heart was heavy with a loneliness she did not dare confess aloud. Her days began before dawn and ended after dark, filled with the sounds of hooves, the bawling of calves, and the steady barked orders she gave to her ranch hands. But when silence fell at night, when the long halls of her great ranch house echoed, with nothing but her footsteps, she felt the weight of emptiness pressing upon her. She had not always been alone. Once she had been a wife, though for only a brief, fleeting season. Her husband, Thomas Whitfield, had been a man of ambition, eager to carve a fortune out of the unforgiving land. Together, they had dreamed of building an empire. But fate had dealt a cruel hand. A fever swept through the camp the year after they wed, taking him before their life together had even begun in earnest. Eleanor, barely 20 at the time, was left with land, cattle, and an aching grief. Instead of retreating or remarrying, she had steeled herself, determined to preserve what they had started. Years had passed since then, and Eleanor had grown into a woman both formidable and feared. Her workers respected her because she was fair, but few dared speak to her as anything other than Mrs. Whitfield. She rode among them with an air of control, carrying herself as though untouched by weakness, though inside she sometimes longed for someone who would see her not as a landowner or employer, but simply as Eleanor. Her beauty, once soft and girlish, had become something more striking: sharp cheekbones, steady hazel eyes, and the fullness of her figure, which she often wrapped in practical riding skirts. Men looked, certainly, but they did not approach. Some thought her pride too high. Others whispered she was unapproachable, too wealthy, too untouchable. The ranch itself became her companion. She knew every fence post, every stretch of grazing land, every horse by its gait. But even the comfort of her land could not soothe the long nights when she sat in her parlor, staring at the fire. The laughter of youth had left her. What remained was duty: cattle to count, ledgers to balance, fields to maintain. She ran her ranch with the precision of a soldier, yet her heart yearned for something that work could not provide. What made her loneliness sting most was how invisible it seemed to those around her. The ranch hands saw her as strong, and the townsfolk admired her wealth, yet not a soul seemed to notice how her voice softened when she lingered near the children of visiting families, or how her eyes dimmed whenever a young couple passed by, holding hands. She would never admit it, but she longed for touch, for warmth, for someone who would reach across the silence and claim her not as a boss or a wealthy widow, but as a woman who could still love and be loved. Eleanor carried her solitude like armor. If men could not see past the steel of her independence, then so be it. She told herself she did not need them, that her success and land were enough. Yet there were moments on moonlit nights, or when the wind howled across the open plains, when her defenses wavered. In those moments, she would place a hand against the window pane and whisper into the emptiness, asking if perhaps her heart would always remain unanswered. It was into this quiet, aching solitude that the first ripples of change would come. Could not have known that beyond her fences, a man equally burdened by hardship was making his way toward her land. His path would soon cross hers, shattering the stillness of her life. But for now, Eleanor remained alone, a rich and lonely rancher woman, unaware that her world was on the brink of being altered forever. Chayton had once been the pride of his people, a warrior whose name carried weight among the Lakota. His broad shoulders bore the scars of battles fought to protect his homeland, and his eyes carried the depth of one who had seen too much loss. Once he had walked with his head high, with the confidence of a man whose place in the world was certain. But Those days were slipping into memory. The war with the United States soldiers, the constant push of settlers, the broken promises of treaties, all had left his people scattered, weakened, and desperate. For Chayton, the greatest wound was not the battles lost, but the suffering of his younger sister Ahive. She had been delicate since childhood, but recent months had hollowed her cheeks and weakened her step. He had done all he could, hunting, trading, gathering medicine from the land. Yet her cough worsened and her body weakened further with each passing day. He knew she needed more than what the fractured remnants of their people could provide. She needed food, warmth, medicine, the kind that only came with money or trade. Pride burned in his chest like fire, for to seek help from the very settlers who had taken so much from him felt like surrender. But love for his sister outweighed his pride. So, with his bow strapped across his back and a weary determination in his stride, Chayton made his way across the plains toward the ranches he knew lay to the south. He did not know what welcome or rejection awaited him there. Most white ranchers looked upon men like him with suspicion or outright hatred. Yet he had little choice. His people had been pushed to the edge, and his sister's weak breath haunted him every time he closed his eyes. He whispered prayers to the Great Spirit for strength, even as his pride rebelled at the thought of asking for anything. By the time Eleanor Whitfield's ranch came into sight, Chayton's boots were worn and his body tired from days of travel. The land stretched wide and prosperous before him, herds grazing in fenced fields that once had been wild hunting grounds. The sight stirred bitterness in him, but he forced it down. If he carried anger into this meeting, he would find nothing but a closed door. When he arrived at the ranch yard, the hands paused their work to stare. Their eyes carried mistrust, some even contempt. One man reached for the rifle, leaning against the fence, but Chayton raised his hands in peace. His voice, deep and resonant, carried calm though his heart thundered in his chest. I seek only work. I can mend fences, tend cattle, break horses. I ask for nothing but a chance to earn food. His words were met with muttering and narrowed eyes. To them, he was an intruder, an enemy, a man who had no place among them. But before the tension could erupt, Eleanor appeared from the main house, her skirts brushing the dust as she strode forward. Her presence silenced the yard. She studied him with keen hazel eyes, neither flinching nor frowning. There was something in her gaze that unsettled him, not hostility, not fear, but curiosity. Why here? She asked, her voice steady but edged with caution. Chayton met her eyes, refusing to bow his head. Because I have a sister. She is sick. I cannot let her die. His jaw tightened as he forced the words out. I will not beg, but I will work. Harder than any man here. Only give me the chance. It cost him dearly to speak so openly. Every syllable felt like stripping away his dignity. Yet, as he stood before the wealthy rancher woman, he knew there was no other way. His sister's life was worth more than his pride. The ranch yard remained still, all eyes fixed on the unlikely pair, the proud Lakota warrior, weathered by hardship, and the rich widow whose land sprawled like a kingdom. Neither yet knew it, but this meeting, this moment born of desperation and loneliness, was the spark that would set both their lives on a course neither had imagined. Eleanor had not intended to hire him. When Chayton first stood in her yard, tall and unyielding despite his obvious weariness, she felt an instinctive hesitation. The ranch was already tense enough without adding the presence of a Lakota warrior to it. Her foreman, a grizzled man named Randall, muttered his disapproval under his breath the moment Chayton's back was turned. Ain't wise, Mrs. Whitfield. The men won't like it. Folks in town sure as hell won't like it either. But something in Eleanor resisted dismissing him outright. She studied the man carefully, the scars on his arms, the set of his jaw. The way he spoke of his sister without shame but also without self-pity. He did not grovel. He did not make excuses. He simply offered his strength in exchange for survival. There was dignity in that, even if desperation lingered behind his eyes. And Eleanor, though she rarely admitted it to herself, knew something. About desperation. Fine, she said at last, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from Randall. You'll work under my watch. You prove yourself useful, you stay. Fail me, and you leave. Chayton inclined his head once, a warrior's acknowledgment, not a servant's bow. I will not fail. From the start, the arrangement was uneasy. The ranch hands kept their distance, muttering when they thought Eleanor couldn't hear. They watched him with suspicion as he set to work, testing him by assigning the hardest, dirtiest jobs. Eleanor, curious to see if his bold claims matched his ability, allowed it. Chayton accepted each task without complaint. He carried fence posts across the fields, swung the hammer until sweat poured from his brow, and rode out to gather stray cattle with a steady hand on the reins. He worked as if his life depended on it, and in truth, it did. Days turned into weeks, and Eleanor found herself observing him more closely than she intended. He rose before dawn, moving with the silence of a hunter. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were careful, measured, never wasted. She noticed how his eyes softened when he mentioned his sister, and how he touched the horses with a gentleness that contrasted with his hardened exterior. The men might have doubted him, but Eleanor saw his worth. Yet there was something else she noticed too, something she tried to dismiss but could not ignore, the way her heart quickened when their eyes met across the corral, the warmth that spread through her chest when his deep voice reached her ears. She had not felt such a stirring in years, and it unsettled her. He was different in every way, different in blood, in culture, in the life he had led. But his strength was undeniable, and his presence seemed to fill the spaces in her life that had long stood empty. For Chayton, the days at the ranch were a constant test of restraint. He had expected disdain from the men and coldness from their mistress. What he had not expected was Eleanor herself. She was unlike any woman he had known, proud yet fair, commanding yet kind. Her loneliness was something he recognized, though. She hid it behind sharp words and stern eyes. There were moments when he caught her watching him, her gaze lingering longer than it should. In those moments, something inside him stirred, something dangerous, something he told himself he could not pursue. Still, the unspoken tension grew. A brush of hands when she passed him tools, a shared silence as they rode side by side across the plains, a glance that lingered in the soft glow of the evening sun. Neither acknowledged it, yet both felt the pull dot by the end of the first month. The other men no longer challenged his presence. They could not deny his labor, nor his skill. But their acceptance was grudging at best, and Eleanor knew it. Randall warned her in hushed tones. You're letting him get too close. The men see it. The town will see it. And when they do, it'll be you paying the price. Eleanor brushed off his words, though they unsettled her. She told herself Chayton was only a worker, nothing more. But late at night, when she walked the halls of her house and the silence closed in again, she found her thoughts drifting to him, the proud warrior who had humbled himself for the sake of his sister, and who worked with the strength of 10 men. He had entered her life out of desperation, but slowly, imperceptibly, he was becoming something more. The arrangement that had begun in necessity was shaping into something unexpected. Neither Eleanor nor Chayton would admit it, not yet. But the lines between duty, survival, and desire were already beginning to blur. The storm came without warning. Dark clouds rolled across the prairie sky, heavy and low, and by evening the winds tore at the ranch with merciless force. Rain poured down in sheets, flooding the pens and driving the cattle into panic. Eleanor had seen storms like this before, but not one that struck with such sudden fury. She gathered the men and shouted orders above the thunder, her voice carrying authority even as her skirts whipped around her legs. Chayton was already among the cattle, his strong hands steadying frightened animals, his voice low and commanding. As he coaxed them back into order, he moved through the chaos with fearless grace, as if the storm itself had no power over him. Eleanor rode out to meet him, her hat torn from her head by the wind, her hair plastered against her face. Together they worked through the night, driving cattle back into the pens, hammering loose boards into place, and forcing gates shut against the gale dot. By the time the storm began to break, they were soaked to the bone, mud streaked across their clothes and faces, but the work was not finished. A section of fencing on the north side had collapsed, and the cattle there were spilling into the open plains. Eleanor and Chayton rode hard to contain them, their horses battling the mud with each stride. Eleanor's hands blistered from the rope, and her muscles ached with exhaustion, but she pressed on. Beside her, Chayton matched her every effort, his jaw set in determination. At last, when the last steer was corralled and the final gate closed, they staggered back to the barn, collapsing against the wall. The storm had left them drained, yet a strange exhilaration hummed between them. In the dim light of the lantern, Eleanor noticed Chayton's hand bloodied from a deep gash where a nail had torn the flesh. "Let me see that," she said, her voice softer now. "It is nothing," he muttered, trying to pull his hand away. But Eleanor caught it firmly, her fingers surprisingly gentle against his calloused skin. She led him inside, where the warmth of the lantern light and the scent of hay wrapped around them like a cocoon. She fetched clean cloth and a basin of water, her movements brisk yet tender. As she cleaned the wound, Chayton sat still, watching her. He was close enough to see the strands of damp hair clinging to her cheek, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath when she leaned over him. She worked in silence, her brow furrowed in concentration. For Eleanor, the task was simple. She had tended to injured men before, but this felt different. Every brush of her fingers against his skin sent a shiver through her. When she finished binding his hand, she looked up and their eyes met. Neither moved at first, yet the air between them thickened, heavy with something unspoken. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She told herself to stand, to put distance between them, but she couldn't. His gaze held her fast, and for the first time in years, she felt the raw vulnerability of being seen not as a rancher, not as a widow, but as a woman. Chayton's breath caught. He had sworn to himself he would keep his distance, that he would not bring trouble upon her or himself. Yet in that moment, restraint felt impossible. He leaned closer, his voice low, rough with emotion. "Please," he whispered, the word trembling as if torn from the deepest part of him. "Allow me." Only the tip, no more. It was not crude, not a demand. It was a plea, filled with reverence and desperation, as though he feared to take too much but longed to prove his yearning was real. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her heart warred with her mind, propriety against desire, loneliness against restraint. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw not a man seeking conquest, but one begging for closeness, for connection, for the chance to bridge the chasm between them. Her hand, almost of its own accord, rose to touch his cheek. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, rough from the wind and sun. The smallest smile tugged at her lips, a smile she had not felt in years. "Chayton," she whispered, her voice breaking. That was all it took. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then deepening as the weight of years of loneliness and longing poured into the kiss. The barn around them faded into silence, the storm outside reduced to a distant murmur. In that moment, Eleanor was no longer the untouchable rancher woman, and Chayton no longer the desperate warrior. They were simply a man and a woman, stripped of defenses, surrendering to a bond neither could deny. What began as a plea became a promise, and in the quiet intimacy of that night, both of them found a piece of the solace they had been missing. The morning after the storm brought with it a fragile calm, but the quiet of Eleanor Whitfield's ranch belied the tension that was soon to come. Word travels fast in a small town, and it did not take long for the other ranch hands to notice the shift between Eleanor and Chayton. A lingering glance, the faint warmth in Eleanor's voice when she spoke to him, the slight hesitation in his tone whenever she was near small details, easily overlooked by the unobservant, but glaringly obvious to those attuned to gossip. Randall, Eleanor's foreman, was the first to voice his concern, his brow furrowed and hands clenched on the rail of the fence. "You're letting him get too close," Randall said, almost angrily. "The men are talking, and the town won't take kindly to it either. You're risking more than just your reputation." Eleanor, brushing the warning aside, insisted that her loyalty and attention to the ranch came first. Yet she could not deny the flutter in her chest when Chayton approached, his eyes scanning hers with a quiet intensity that had become impossible to ignore. She told herself it was harmless, a natural response to shared hardship and the storms strain. But when a visiting neighbor mentioned seeing them return late together, laughing softly despite exhaustion, whispers began to circulate. The tension escalated when a traveling trader, staying at the local inn, spread the rumor to the five townsfolk. A Lakota man and a wealthy widow were more than mere acquaintances. That afternoon, Eleanor overheard women in the general store exchanging knowing glances and hushed tones. The whispers spoke of impropriety, of scandal, of moral failing. Though Eleanor had endured judgment in her life, this felt different. It cut deeper, challenging not her skills or her wealth, but her very right to be happy. Chayton sensed the growing hostility as well. The ranch hands became tense around him, some openly refusing to work alongside him. Strangers in the town gave him hard stares, their suspicion mingled with fear and disdain. He had faced prejudice before, but never so sharply and so personally, nor against someone he cared for as deeply as he did Eleanor. The walls he had built around his pride and heart trembled, but he refused to step back. He had come too far, fought too many battles, and now he realized he was fighting not just for his sister's survival, but for something he had not anticipated: a chance at love. The conflict reached a climax one afternoon when a group of men from the town rode to the ranch. They were determined to confront Eleanor, their accusations blunt and unyielding. "You're bringing shame upon yourself," one declared. "And him? He doesn't belong here." Eleanor stood her ground, her posture erect, her voice calm yet firm. "Chayton is no threat to me. He works hard, he protects this ranch, and I trust him. That is enough." Her declaration shocked the men, leaving them momentarily speechless. But their judgment lingered like a shadow over the land, reminding Eleanor and Chayton that love rarely blooms without obstacles. In private, the weight of the scrutiny forced Eleanor and Chayton to confront the risks their bond entailed. They could part ways to preserve appearances, but the thought of separation felt unbearable. Chayton, with his usual quiet dignity, assured her that he would not leave, not for fear, not for pride, not for anything in the world. Eleanor, in turn, realized that her loneliness had been masking her need for courage, her willingness to stand against societal expectation in the name of something real, something human. The storm of scandal, though external, became a mirror for the storm inside them: fear, desire, longing, and the weight of defiance all colliding. Yet in facing this trial, they found strength. Their connection, once secret and tentative, began to solidify into a partnership not just of passion, but of shared resolve. They began to understand that love, when genuine, is never passive. It demands courage, and it demands risk. By the evening, As Eleanor rode through the pens and Chayton walked beside her, the wind carried away some of the tension. They moved as a unit, their trust in each other deepened by the trials of the day. The world around them may have whispered judgment, but within the walls of the ranch, they had begun to define their own rules, their own morality. It was a lesson. In resilience, in bravery, and in the unyielding power of two people choosing each other against the odds. Though challenges remained, Eleanor and Chayton had discovered something invaluable, the certainty that love, once found, could be worth confronting the world for. The tension that had haunted Eleanor and Chayton for weeks reached its peak one crisp autumn morning. The town's gossip had grown louder, and whispers now carried veiled threats. Eleanor could feel the eyes of the townsfolk on her as she rode into town to purchase supplies, their stares following her across the dirt streets. Chayton rode beside her, silent and imposing, his expression calm but alert. Each man who glanced at him seemed to measure the distance between social worlds, Lakota warrior and wealthy white widow, yet neither Eleanor nor Chayton faltered. Back at the ranch, Randall had voiced his concern again, though this time his words carried a tinge of fear. "They'll come for you," he warned. "They'll try to ruin you or drive him off." Eleanor met his gaze evenly. "If they try," she said, "they'll find I'm not a woman to be pushed aside." She spoke not with pride alone, but with the strength born from months of struggle and longing, the desire to protect something she had finally allowed herself to cherish. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. A small group of townsmen, emboldened by rumor and prejudice, rode into the yard. They demanded Chayton leave immediately, citing public outrage and the impropriety of your relationship with the lady of this ranch. They were loud, brash, and certain of their power. But Eleanor stepped forward, her posture commanding, her eyes blazing with determination. "Chayton is no thief, no criminal, no trespasser," she declared, her voice carrying across the yard. "He is a worker, a protector, and a man I trust. His worth is greater than the fear and ignorance of those who judge him." Her words were not just a defense of Chayton. They were a declaration of her own autonomy, a statement that she would no longer allow societal expectation to dictate her life. Chayton, standing tall beside her, felt a swell of pride and love. For the first time in years, he was not hiding who he was, not suppressing his heritage or his desire to love. He spoke then, his voice low but steady, "I will remain here. Not for myself, but because she has given me trust and because I choose to be here by her side." The standoff could have escalated, but the determination in Eleanor's voice and the calm dignity in Chayton's presence created a force that could not be easily challenged. The townsmen, after exchanging uneasy glances, left with muttered complaints, defeated not by violence but by the unwavering courage of two people who refused to yield to fear. In the days that followed, life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The men and women who worked for Eleanor began to accept Chayton fully, recognizing that his loyalty, skill, and integrity were beyond question. The townsfolk remained cautious, but the bold defiance of Eleanor and Chayton had forced them to reconsider their assumptions. The couple found a quiet strength in each other, building trust and deepening their bond. Their love was no longer secret, it had become a partnership, rooted in respect, courage, and shared experience. Eleanor found herself laughing again, her joy no longer fleeting or hidden. She shared meals with Chayton, rode together across the plains, and allowed herself the comfort of his presence in the evenings. Chayton, in turn, felt a profound sense of belonging. He had come to the ranch out of desperation, but he stayed out of love, and in doing so, he reclaimed a sense of honor and purpose he thought lost. Together, they began to rebuild the ranch, not just repairing fences and tending cattle, but shaping a life where they could stand as equals. Eleanor taught Chayton the intricacies of managing the land and livestock, while he shared his knowledge of the plains, tracking, and the ways of his people. Their partnership became a blend of skill, intellect, and heart, each drawing strength from the other. By the time the first snow fell, dusting the plains with a soft white blanket, Eleanor and Chayton stood side by side on the veranda, gazing over the land they had fought to protect and nurture. They no longer feared judgment, nor did they question the validity of their love. It was a bond forged through hardship, tempered by courage, and sealed with trust. In the end, Eleanor's loneliness was gone, replaced by a fierce, radiant connection. Chayton's desperation had transformed into hope and belonging. They had faced prejudice, scandal, and fear, and emerged not only unbroken but united. Together, they would face whatever future came, knowing that love, when chosen bravely, could conquer even the harshest storms of life.